Hi, it's Sage and I'm here today with a theory/discussion video. The aim of this video is to open up discussion for things on the Void Century and what I believe may have happened or be the cause of some of the structures we see in One Piece. Now, by this, I of course mean things to do with the Ancient Kingdom, things to do with the different races, and I also mean how the landmass itself in One Piece is laid out. Now, for those who are less aware of the basic map of One Piece, there's a big old circle around the middle called the Grand Line, and that's a kind of an ocean, and then there's a calm belt around that, which stops easy transportation in and out of that ocean, and then there's 4 separate oceans which are divided by one ring of land around the middle. That's a rough kind of gist of what's going on. Now, what I believe happened is there was sea rising, and there's a lot of ocean in One Piece, and I think that during that time of the sea rising, the humans had to find better land. And the way they did this was exploring the oceans and finding that land for themselves. And I believe some of these people could have been pirates, and I think some of them were explorers like Noland. Now, what's important is that I don't think the Grand Line was always separate. I think that at some point in the One Piece world, the Grand Line became separate. But I think humans were always there. Now, the reason this is important is because of the races of One Piece, and there are several races of One Piece which I believe evolved from humans. I believe that the fishmen, like Arlong says way back in Arlong Park, are an evolved form of human who are adapting to the new world they're living in. And the same for the mink, and the same for the long arm and the long legs. Just different stages of evolution, different mutations, just, you know, simple changes to help them survive the harsh conditions of the Grand Line, because there hasn't always been the technology that we have now in One Piece. Think of it as kind of like the variations of the Galapagos Islands between the different sparrows with different beak shapes. Now, when I say theory discussion, obviously this part is less theory and more logical, because it is logical that all of the races evolved from humans, because they can share blood, like we saw on Fishman Island between Jinbe and Luffy. And the theory part is what I'm going to talk about next. Now, we know that in One Piece there are often other mythologies that are linked back to and hailed back to throughout the story. Aztec mythology is quite apparent in the Shandorians and the Skypians. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when I was looking into different mythologies and having a look into what might have inspired some of the things of One Piece, I found that there's a creation myth called the 5 Suns in Aztec mythology. And to give a rough basic idea of the 5 Suns for you, it's actually a collection, or kind of a almost biblical kind of section of the Aztec mythology. It's that Genesis. And in the 5 Suns, there are 5 different gods who create the world over and over again. And our current time is the last sun for us. And I believe in the One Piece world as well. And I'll go into that in a second. The reason that I think the 5 Sun relates to the One Piece world and to us in this story is because the Gorosei are the 5 stars, you know, and a sun is a star. It's that simple for the basis. But before the mythology of the five suns, there is a void. And before we have the Gorosei, there is the void century. And the parallels don't end there. The next is that first came the giants, which the humans turned into giants in this context. And then they turned into monkeys, like the minks. And then they turned into birds, like Big Nose Morgans. And then fish, like Jimby and the Fishman. And at the moment we have humans again. So other than the races and the fact that the celestial dragons and the Gorosei and all of this have like this void connection with it, and other than all of that, there's also the fact that earthquakes will end the current world, which is a really similar quote about Whitebeard's fruit. Whitebeard's fruit was said to have the power to end the world. Right. So if we're looking into this, what can we take from this myth that's important? Well, to me, it is that exact conjuncture. So we have 4 old Gorosei who are past their prime. There's no getting around it. No matter how strong they aren't who they have been. And we have one last Gorosei in his prime, much like we have one last sun in the myth left burning. And he will be destroyed by earthquakes. And so that was once Whitebeard, but now that's Blackbeard. And I believe that it is possible that Blackbeard will take down a Gorosei. He could go for Marishua. Like, it's plausible. And I don't think the end of the world necessarily in this context means very literally. I think it could mean politically or figuratively the end of their reign. The next thing I want to talk about is the national treasure. Now, Blackbeard, he probably won't become Pirate King, or if he does, it won't be for very long, because that's Luffy's job, and that will always be Luffy. Like, there's no getting around that eventuality. We have a clear A to B in One Piece. But Blackbeard doesn't have a clear A to B, because we know for ourselves that that's what's going to happen, but Blackbeard doesn't. And Blackbeard has been told he's not the D that Roger was waiting for. But that might also mean that he sets himself new goals, and goals that he finds important. So what the national treasure is, I have my own speculations, but they're not important. The gist of it is that I think that it is more than plausible, based on this mythology, that he could launch an attack on Marishua to go after that national treasure after the events of finding the One Piece happen. So how does that link into what I've already said? You could say that because of the mythology saying that it was first the giants, that first the giants evolved, and that they are one of the older species of the Grand Line. And then the minks evolved, and then the birdmen, and then the fishmen being one of the newer species that evolved. Why is that important? Well, because it kind of ties together a lot of different things. There's more than one important point within this, and it's a discussion that I'd like to open up. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is the flood that I've mentioned. Now, the reason that I believe that is I believe the Void Century contained a war that was over land. And there's panels in the Skypiea arc where they first see the Verth and they go, I want it. I want that land. That land should be mine. And I think that's hailing back to what might have happened with the humans when they went into the Grand Line after having run out of land. And I think they kicked off the non-human looking species from their homes. And I think that the ancient weapons may have been in a defense for their land. They were trying to have a home. And what evidence do I have for this? Well, the more human looking it is, like, it's labelled a tribe rather than a race, like the long arms and long legs. And the less human looking, the less land they have. The fishmen don't even have their own home, and the minks are much the same. Zanisha, I believe, having been labelled a traitor, destroyed the original mink home. Straight up, I think she betrayed them, and I think that only the people of Wano have the power to relinquish her, because the Kozuki clan most likely were an ally of the minks in that war. And that's why they don't side with the world government now, is because fundamentally they don't agree with how that land in the Grand Line has been spread out. Now, there's a lot of wealth in the Grand Line as well, so it's plausible that explorers come from the Four Blues, they finally have the technology to go up the reverse mountain, travel across this Grand Line, and they pillage. They go mad, and they don't see these tribes as being human. They don't see them as having rights to that land, and they kick them off, and they use that land for themselves, like Dressrosa and the dwarves. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of these instances where non-human tribes or races, or whatever you want to call them in this, don't have their land anymore. And we do have a world that has a whole lot of ocean, which is why I believe that the sea levels rose, and they looked outside, and technology grew, and they were capable of getting around the Grand Line again. And I think great evidence of this evolution and how it is different on the Grand Line and how it is almost like the Galapagos Island is Little Garden. Because Little Garden is an island frozen in time. It still has dinosaurs. It still has these creatures from a prehistoric time. And I think that that is 100% plausible. That that's the situation for many of these races. Is that they are evolved and they are isolated and specialised to the Grand Line. Well, that's the theory, that's the discussion, and that's most of what I wanted to talk about. You know, this war over land, Zoe becoming an ark for the people whose home it destroyed, Fishman Island being kicked off of their land and having to stay down at the bottom of the ocean rather than on Sabodi. Sabodi, a perfect place for the fishmen to actually have lived in the first place. That place is where all of these bubbles are coming from too. And that is what the mermaids use to get around. It makes perfect sense that that was the original land they were on. I mean, well, it makes sense to me at least. That was Sage, and that's my spicy speculation.